I tell you what, being able to do something that matters, doing it with the people that I've got to build it with, getting to face the challenges we do, whether we succeed long term or we fail, it's worth it. It's worth it again. And if you ask me, knowing what I know now, would I do this again? Hell yeah, sign me up. I'll do it.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Executive. If this is your first time joining, this is a podcast where we interview some of the best founders, investors, and operators on about the companies that they're building, but also their life lessons and advice on how to build these companies and what type of companies to invest in and some of the pitfalls. We try to go really tactical on the advice, and so that people and listeners can really put it into practice in their own lives. And we also interview really interesting companies. And today I'm excited to talk about a company that's doing really interesting things. We're with Nate Millecam, who is the CEO and co-founder of Electronic Power Systems, who, I want to get this right, they are the emerging leader, and I say maybe they are the leader in high power scalable powertrains that are certifiable for electronic aviation, which is a long-winded way of saying they are powering electronic aviation in the future. So if you think about what Tesla has done in making all these cars electronic, ripping apart the car, building new powertrains, rethinking about how to do batteries so that they're light enough, but yet there's enough power in there for these long-range vehicles, just like a normal fuel car. That's what's happening in aviation, and that's what EPS and Nate and his company are working on. So they're building the powertrain, right? The heart of the plane in order to transfer power electronically, so that these planes can be up in the air for, right now they just came up with a new system that they were at about 60 minutes, which is, if you think about it, that's a lot of flight time for small planes. Now they just came out with a new system that's 90 minutes. And so they just essentially, for what the reason that matters is for small airplanes, a lot of their flight travel is not that long anyways. That's double the amount of airports and distances that they can go due to that. So really interesting company. They've raised over $100 million. They're now over 100 people. They have some of their investors include Boeing. That's also one of their, believe their big customers. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. But really excited to talk about the industry, but also how you build such a difficult hard tech type company that, it seems like it would be so far away. It doesn't even feel like cars are quite there on running off electric batteries. And now we're talking about aviation. So without further ado, Nate Millecam, CEO and co-founder, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Nate, I want to get into your background, but one thing I think that might be helpful is, as we think about what's happened with cars over the last 10, 15 years and how cars have gone electronic, and Tesla's obviously led a lot of the charge around that. And now we're seeing that in aviation. Can you explain kind of from like a 10,000 foot view of how does aviation go electronic, and what is EPS's role in making sure that happens?
That's a great question. Well, it'll be different than how automotive did. In some regards, automotive has a very standard mission that it does. It drives people from one spot to the other. And when you look at aviation and defense, the vehicle is very customized to what you're moving and how far you're moving. And so when you start to look at, well, should we go electric? Should we be hybrid? Should we even just electrify some of the systems that are traditionally mechanical? It's very, very different how it'll happen. And there's some similarities that I think you will see. Similar challenges to automotive, you've got deeply entrenched incumbents who are just not real motivated for the movement to happen. And there's some really good reasons for that. I don't want to pick on my alma mater at Honeywell for 7 years. And you look at our mechanical business, or in their mechanical business, they make most of their money in the aftermarket on parts that break. And that's really, really hard to convert your whole business to reliable, efficient, clean electric parts. So I think some really good reasons why the incumbency won't do it. But similar to what happened in automotive, you've got a bunch of startups that are just hungry, hungry to change this. And so when you look at our role, one of the unique things about EP Systems is we're doing something that nobody's doing. Aerospace is very custom. It's very bespoke. And when you look at power systems, it's like some can be high voltage, some can be low voltage, some can have tons of power, some can more want energy. We're taking an approach to modularize and standardize it. So it's not just one architecture, one platform that wins, but the entire aerospace industry can start to electrify. Whether that's you're going to pick a system that used to be mechanical on a legacy aircraft, or you've got a really advanced new aircraft concept that you need the propulsion concept to close. And if it doesn't close, you don't have a business. So we're privileged to work on all of those problems and standardize and move the whole thing forward at once.
So you're building, the backbone, which is the powertrain and the power source, right, of these planes. So then you can just plug into all these different types of aviation applications. Whereas you may know this, where Tesla, did they build their own powertrain, or were they, did they source it from like an EPS type company?
Well, what's interesting about Tesla is they started with the powertrain, and where they outsourced was actually the vehicle in the very, very early days when they were small. Now, as they grew and they matured that, they vertically integrated more, and now they're known for what they're known of being so much more than just a car company or an automotive company. You can see parallels. Are they an infrastructure company? Are they a software company? Well, they do a lot of those things.
Where EPS, you're saying we're starting with what we think is, the heart, right? It is the power source. And then right now, the goal is to plug into all these different companies that already have the car, the plane, right? And start from there. Start with the one main component.
Yeah, our strategy is to enable our company, our customers. Airframes are hard enough. Big integrated systems with avionics are hard enough. So when you look at propulsion, when you look at power, and our job is to not only provide some of the basic building blocks, such as energy storage, really, really critical to the electrification movement, but also the protections and the software. The software is so paramount in what we're doing to be able to combine all these different electrical capabilities into a cohesive or tailored system to our customers that closes for their mission parameters.
Well, let's take, I do want to hear, the background story. You talked about being at Honeywell. You were at some pretty large companies. That's pretty standard in the aerospace industry from what I've seen. A lot of people work at the Boeings, the Honeywells, and then they get this itch, right, to try something new. What made you go co-found EPS? And startups are hard enough. It's one thing, to build a software company, and you're building a hard tech company with software components. What made you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it started early days. I was at Honeywell Aerospace. I was in a leadership development program, and I was put in charge as the program manager of a power system development on the first more electric airplane, the 787 Dreamliner. And Matt, I was hooked. You looked at that architecture, and it took a whole bunch of mechanical systems, made it electrical. It took the voltage up. It went to variable frequency. And what power meant for that aircraft was ride comfort changed. The user experience on the aircraft changed. It changed that we could do more point to point globally. And the buzz that happened in the industry at that time was, well, once we're done with this one, we're going to go to narrow bodies. We're going to go to military vehicles, and everything is going to go more electric and electric. And then something happened that was unexpected. The batteries caught fire early months into service. And the revolution almost died. It almost died at that point. Now, it was fixed. The CERT framework, the context of how it was integrated in the aircraft, the controls, all were fixed. But by when it was all said and done, Cost Boeing about $630 million after certification just to mature the battery alone, one battery on the aircraft. And if you look at my story and you look at my team's story, we were the ones after that event still put in charge of let's electrify the industry, let's change, let's move things. And what we learned through not only the 787 but experience is it's very, very hard to change things within the walls of a big company. I guess you can just say we're all believers, and the technology has continued to advance, and it's continued to open up new opportunities where you can say, hey, not only are we talking about just electrifying systems on a traditional wing and tube approach, we can create new things like electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. We work with sea gliders, we work with lunar landers. The whole industry is now at a precipice of changing, and we feel like our role is we can take some of those lessons learned from the last time that we were talking about electrifying it and say, let's do this where not only do we push the envelope in technology, but we make sure the certification, the safety, the reliability. So those people that we love, our families that we put on these airplanes, that the public trusts us, that they can count this is going to be done right the first time, and it's going to absolutely continue to change the world.
So you saw that the industry needed change. You knew how to do it, but at a big company, like so many companies, just so tough to do. So you're like, I got to do this. This is where the industry's going.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
had to go scratch the itch. Yeah.
Had to go do it. And what we've been really fortunate about is the capital markets have shown a strong desire for change. We couldn't do this without efficient capital markets, great academic partners. When government, academia, and capital, both knowledge and financial, get around a problem in the United States, you can't stop us. You just can't.
Great things happen. So in the early days, is that where a lot of funding came from? It was actually from government funding?
Yeah. So early days when we were maturing the technology, NASA, we wouldn't be here without NASA. And NASA, when they want to do things, they create an X plane. So they created the X-57, and its intent was to mature distributed electric propulsion. And we all thought the battery technology, although it was going to be challenging, was not purpose of the research project. What we learned was those key components like motors, batteries, battery management, how we contain, how we certified. That's what we actually had to mature to make the industry happen. And so we solved a very, very difficult problem on that. Unlike automotive, when batteries catch on fire or have thermal events, as we like to nicely call it, you can't pull over your car, especially if you're in space or at 30,000 feet. You have to have power to whatever you're powering. And so failure, not only in providing power, but then having that event consume the vehicle is an unacceptable outcome. It can never, 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 never happen. And so if you look at who actually was solving that, you had really two entities. You had NASA and you had the Boeing company who solved it on 787 Dreamliner. And one of the things we track very closely is what we call packaging overhead. It's the ratio of how much weight you're putting of cells versus everything else on the pack. And Boeing, this is a public domain, 241% packaging overhead. Well, you just can't make electrification close on that packaging overhead. We took a substantial step change on X-57 where we went to 34% packaging overhead. And it was such a groundbreaking event, and we actually certified under NASA's highest man rating standard that we were fortunate to just see capital come in from industry, from academia, from government. And that gave us a chance to play in the sandbox. We've flown on, over 13, 14 different vehicles now. We've done drones, eVTOLs, fixed wings. We have something swimming in the ocean right now in a naval application. And we've also have something that will land on the moon next year. And so that's really gave us a chance to not only get capital from dilutive sources, the capital markets, but we've got to work with R&D funds to really ensure that we had great product market fit and to solve the challenges that our customers needed solved in order to make this revolution happen.
So you've got government funding in the beginning to kind of help you said get to product market fit. How do you know your product seems pretty adaptable, but early on with a lot of companies, they say kind of focus on maybe one industry, right? Or one lane and try to nail that. But it seems like you're actually across quite a few different applications between going to the moon, being in water, small airplanes. How do you think about that and where to put your time and focus, or you're not really forced to?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer is we're not forced to. We were thoughtful when we designed the product strategy early on. Because when we sat back, Matt, we weren't smart enough to know where electrification was going to start and where it was going to win in aerospace and defense. And the other thing in early days that we got right is we were troubled. We were troubled by, is it the establishment or some startup that we don't even know about that's going to drive this revolution? And so if we defined the problem differently. We said, instead of making one application, one segment, one vehicle happen, what if we made the entire industry happen? And how would we do that? And so what that took us on a journey was, well, we had to know our market. We had to know our customers. We had to know their problems. We had to know their requirements really, really well. And we were in a fortunate position that we could see all those things. We've seen over 800 unique designs that we've done for almost everybody in the world. And we could really take all those requirements and say, what works for almost everybody? And are there some things that if we could do, like take the cost down, for example, that even though some may be debating this feature or this requirement, that the cost of the time to market was so compelling that we could enable everybody. And so that was the approach we were taking. And that was hugely risky, Matt. We had no idea if that was going to work. Modularity, I can only think of working once in aerospace. Garmin did it in cockpits. Maybe but I don't know of anybody who's scaled like Garmin. And so we bet the farm on, does modular power win for everybody? Now, fortunate that proved to be a really good decision. Here we are 4 years later. We see the common products getting certified, not only with the FAA that we just submitted, but we also see an undersea application. The same module that's going in our DA-40 is going in a submarine for the Department of Defense. A version that's being changed for that is actually, we can fly in hypersonic applications at 200,000 feet. So fortunately, we're able to ride the general electrification trend and not have to bet on just one segment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You're betting on the macro here, right? It's like NVIDIA, everyone talks about AI, and NVIDIA is the benefit, with the chips, and they just can't get enough chips. You're almost hoping I see the commonality of hoping that we cannot get enough powertrains for all these different applications. And that's cool. What a cool place to be and to grow in and be at the center of all this change. I'm sure there were times where you wondered if it was the right bet, being so wide, versus there's some companies that are just focused on electronic airplanes, right? And totally developing the entire thing, and we'll see how that goes. So really interesting bet. What about the as you've built this, this is the first company, as a founder. You've come from the big companies. Were there certain things that you just kind of had to throw out the playbook for, where you're like, this just doesn't work in these small companies? Like, how have you had to change?
That's a great question. Well, start personally. How I've had to change has been a journey, both positive and challenging at the same time. One of the most interesting thing is, when you're at a big company, the processes, the people, the infrastructure, how you do things, some of those were decided decades before I ever got there, and just had to figure out how to be successful within those structures. In a startup, you set all those structures. And one of the unanticipated things that I learned was, for good or for bad, my personality, the way I worked, the good things I did, the weaknesses I had, organizations took on those elements. And so as we started to scale and as we started to get bigger, what's interesting is the things that made us successful, maybe as a 20-person organization, were exactly the wrong things for an 100-person organization. And when you trace back, well, why did we start doing it that way? It's like, well, it's because of me.
Yeah. The company takes on the personality of the co-founders.
Yeah. So I've been on a personal improvement journey. I joke with my staff. I call it, that was Nate 1.0. Don't do what Nate 1.0 told you. We're on Nate 4.0, and Nate 4.0 needs it to run this way.
Right. You got to forget who I was in the past. I'm a new leader. What were those things that worked really well in the beginning that now you're like, that's not me anymore?
Yeah. Well, what was one of the interesting things is when you're small, it's all on you to do things. And you almost start to like that. You get this euphoria of solving a really, really challenging problem. What's interesting is now with the professional leadership team, they do it. And it's a different euphoria. Now it gets me jazzed is when I see somebody that I trained or mentored or hired, they get it and they're successful and they did it all on their own and they did it better. They did it better than I would have ever done it. That's been really rewarding to see that growth in people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've talked to a few other founders, and in the beginning, if you come from a big organization, you're probably used to delegating, right? Like you have to delegate. You've got to manage, and then you become the co-founder. There's just a few of you, and then you have to be really good at figuring out the problem, finding a solution, and you're the only person to do it. And as you grow, obviously, then it starts to change again. But I've seen some where they struggle. They want to delegate stuff early on, but one, there's no one to delegate to. Two, every problem is so important, and you have to be the one that's so in the works, right? Of figuring out what the major issue is. You can't delegate that. You got to know exactly, the problem of the customer and be so entrenched in it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So you've now scaled to over 100 people. I'm sure there are some good things that you did, some bad things. In hard tech, what are some of the hard things about scaling to that size? Because you mentioned earlier too about just even the safety. Startups are known to move fast, break things. But when you're breaking things, that means lives are at risk, right? And so there's probably, I'm sure there's a balance to it. How have you balanced, the speed of innovation with safety and scaling the organization?
That's a wonderful question. It's one we think about all the time. So I don't think you're ever done, and you're always trying to improve is the short answer. Now, some things that we did well. People, we bet on people and we bet on culture. And so we spent the time on a safety culture is bar none. And this came from the very beginning of what we tell people is like, hey, customer will forgive you if you're late. They'll never forgive you if you take down a vehicle, you take a life, or you harm somebody. That's unforgivable. And so we always want to go fast. I'm always going to be that voice in your ear of how do you make it more efficient? How do you make it better? But we just don't compromise on safety. And we always talk about it and we always make that focus. So the other thing is that seems to have permeated throughout the organization, even at 100 people. We've been done very well on safety, reliability, and performance. Now, things that we haven't done well is when you look at what can be a virtue in one area can actually be a vice. There's not a critical mass of skilled people that you can just find, plug in, and then everything works uniformly across the organization. And so process and procedure has always been something that we look at. Things where we didn't do well in the beginning is we had all this process, we had all this procedure. It was doing the job, but we slowed down. We started to become bureaucratic. Even though I was a 100-person organization, there were days I felt like I was in my Honeywell job again, and very difficult to move. And so then you start to sit back and you say, well, why is that? How do we change that? How do we still have the speed, but still have the quality, the reliability, the scalability across the entire organization? So I don't know if I have any good answers for you, Matt, except it's something we always look at. And I will say one comment. Whenever we get it right, we seem to go through another spurt of growth. Going from 15 to 20 people was different than 50. 50 was different than 100. 100 was different than 140, 150. And you can see the organizations stall and progress stall when we get it wrong. When we get it right, then all of a sudden there's bursts of growth, there's bursts of productivity. You just see the whole organization being productive at a scale. And then you see the revenue grow, you see the opportunity space grow. So it's interesting that at every stage we seem to have to go through those barriers and then rethink how we do our work.
So it's obvious to you, like you can just see an organization when things are, they're not working right. And then when you make those tweaks, you kind of sit back, then that's when you see the growth. But is it pretty obvious? I guess a question for you, like, is it obvious, or do you have to take some time aside with the leadership and be like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I've done it long enough. It's obvious to me because there's a couple indicators that I'll look at. I'll look at the financials. Financials don't lie. I'll look at program performance, and you try and look for consistency. If you see something like, well, over here, we're just knocking it out of the park, but over here, that's not as consistent. Why is that not consistent across the whole organization? And then as you walk around, you can feel it in your culture. You can see who's enthused, who's excited, who's still bought into the mission, and then who's really struggling. And when you start to connect those indicators together and you see variability and you see inconsistency, it becomes pretty obviously that we've missed something and we need to rethink some things.
What about where the company's headed? You're, like I said, 100 people, you raised $100 million. You just came out with, a couple announcements. One obviously being the new Epic 2.0. Am I saying it right? The new system where now you can take, flight from, it was 60 minutes with 30 minutes reserve. Now you're 90 minutes, which for small airplanes is pretty impactful because it probably doubles how many airports now you can access. And then you just had an announcement with Whisk, which is this amazingly cool taxi, like, flight taxis, right? If you're stuck in LA, you could just jump in a flight taxi potentially and get over all that traffic. So you're partnering with so many cool companies. Where's the company going now? Where are you putting your focus with probably so many distractions that it's hard to focus?
Yeah. So a couple areas, operational improvement with so many areas we could focus. And because we're starting to get bigger, you want to do all those things. If I look at our core cultural value, one of them is focus on the customer. And the subtitle below that value is commit to your customer success. And what we teach and what we try and instill in our people is it's not enough just to know why the customer hired us. I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, we were lighter weight, cheaper costs, we had better performance features, but you have to understand the why. What are they trying to achieve? What are their deep rooted challenges? You have to care. You have to care just as much as a founder cares about this is their life and death. Well, maybe not death, but this is their life and livelihood. You can only really do that one customer at a time if you're the development team. So we are being more particular on the programs we take in. And part of that's a good thing. Our programs look a lot different. They're bigger now. I can give you some examples where early days you're doing tech maturation, you might assign 5-10 people to a program, and that's the number of headcount you have. Where now when we are doing all cert and production programs, we'll have 30 people, 50 people assigned to a program at a given time. Those people need to focus. They need to focus on one cert at a time. Now, once we're done, obviously we want to move on and we want to continually do that one customer at a time. That's a little bit of our approach. Now, segments is we try and still stay diverse. We have a very big development right now in defense that we're working on. We have a very big development right now in electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. And then we have a very big development we're just taking on with a fixed wing that's all electric. So trying to be as diverse as we can to enable the entire industry, which is our mission.
And when you say a fixed wing, does that mean the engine's actually built into the wing versus the engine being on top of it?
It's distributed electric propulsion. It's still got a prop on it. It's just got a lot of props.
Very cool. Well, tell us a little bit about this Whisk announcement. It's a really cool company, and I hope I explained it right. Of some of the application, there's a lot more application than obviously LA traffic, which is well known of the tunnels. And do we go underground to get around the traffic? Do we go above? But tell me about the partnership with them and what that means.
So it's Whisper Aero, and what Whisper Aero does is it's a ducted electric pod. And Mark Moore, he's the founder of it. You may be familiar with Mark. Mark's been an incredible advocate for the electrification. And quite frankly, we wouldn't be here without Mark. Mark was, when he was at NASA, Mark was really the one who was the catalyst to get NASA to do such a distributed electric propulsion airplane. Well, after he's left Uber, Mark's trying to have a scalable propulsor pod that you can embed into structure. And why I'm really excited about this is I look at the current generation that we're certifying right now. We're just using open props. And that works. It works for certain applications like the Diamond Electric DA40. It works for some eVTOLs, but we're limited by how fast we can go. Now, the minute you introduce a pod, the minute you start to embed it in the wings, well, you can do things in the airframe design that you can't do with an open prop. And the other thing that's really excited about the partnership is similar to our mantra. We want to have modular, scalable power. So if you're an all electric, for example, we don't care whether you're a 30 kilowatt hour pack or you're a 3 megawatt hour pack. Hundreds of pounds to tons of batteries. What's exciting about us being able to scale it and having the cert built around our components, Whisper Aero has done something very similar, is doing something very similar with pods. And so what that means is next generation aircraft go faster. They have higher performance, higher range. So now you can broaden our market share. But because the integrity of the certification and the reliability is now embedded in these modular scalable components, the cost and the speed to be able to do a new aircraft, it goes down by an order of magnitude. And so when we start to look at what's next, what's the second generation in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see it be cheaper, you'll see it be faster, you'll see longer range, you'll see aircraft that normally you'd look at and say, hey, that doesn't close for an electric airplane. It's like, well, that one closes, and the economics are compelling, and the performance is every bit as good, if not better, than what you can get on a combustion engine.
So is that the reason why, obviously there's the reason of just, for carbon reasons of getting off fossil fuels, but is that also the reason for going fully electronic in all these industries, is that it will be faster, cheaper, and longer range in most applications in the future than fossil fuels?
Yeah, so you get an airframe efficiency by embedding it in the wing. So the way I like to think about it from my simple pilot brain is fat wing, great to get off the ground. The minute I go fast, I got tons of drag and I'm burning fuel. Skinny wing, great for when I'm going fast. I spend a lot of fuel getting off the ground. What distributed electric propulsion lets you do is both, essentially. And because we're so concerned about efficiency on the electric side, it also provides a benefit on the hybrid side. You can use batteries just to get up to cruise. We're powerful, or if you want to have a performance, I don't know if you've driven a Tesla or electric vehicle, you get the same performance benefit from the power of the electric side of the equation. But if you want to go really, really far and make it hybrid, you get the equal benefit. The propulsor, the thing that spins, is now embedded in the wing, and you've optimized the airframe where you can do both, and you can be agnostic depending on how far you want to go or what part of the mission you're in what source of energy are you going to use, electric or a fuel source.
I think the question, most people have is, how far out are we? Well, I think we were all far out from electronic cars until, Elon Musk got heavily involved, and obviously quite a few other key people. Now, how far out are we for like the common person, a pilot? Small aircraft will be more, I guess, normal like it is today with Teslas, that they'll be flying electronic aircraft.
Well, In some areas, sooner than you think. So one area, pilot training. This is something we've been working on with Diamond since 2021. As early as next year, you'll start to see pilots being trained in an electric aircraft. Now, some of these more elaborate next generation ones that still need the cert framework to mature or other elements of the architecture to mature, it's going to take longer. So I do believe starting next year, you'll see the very beginning of a virtuous cycle in electrification. And each year you'll see that built upon. You'll see more vehicles, you'll see more capabilities, you'll see it continually used. It's happened by evolution in aerospace. And as long as we're started on that virtuous cycle and we're hitting the performance, the economic guarantees, you'll see it accelerate.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool to think, not too long that we'll be bored in electronic aircrafts, right? Better for everyone. Well, this show, obviously is called The Executive for a reason. We'd love to, dive deep into kind of some of your tactics that have worked really well for you as you built this company. As you kind of look back at what you've built so far, what do you think has been maybe some of the better advice that you've gotten over the years that has really helped you get to where you're at today?
Some of the better advice that has got me here. Well, one is mostly designed around movement and rapid decision making. You kind of contrast to a larger organization. You could debate a good idea until it wasn't a good idea anymore, or you lost the opportunity. One of the interesting things that has been the lifeblood for us is just movement. Because in a lot of cases, you don't know. If you're honest with yourself, you don't know until you're there. Now, designing flexible organization that can pivot really, really quick based off information, that seemed to have enabled us and even saved us time and time again. Being academically honest and allowing people to be able to share, debate, challenge. Another value that we have is sustainable solutions, where we talk about when you come into any discussion, you got to examine your bias. And it's okay to have a bias, but when we have to move and we have to make a decision, we use data. We just use data. We list our assumptions, and if you're wrong, it's okay to be wrong. It's just not okay to keep being wrong and be persistent in being wrong. You have to pivot on data. And so that's been really enabling. We've learned fast. We've gone through a lot of generations of product fast. As I mentioned, when you're doing product market fit and you're doing something that's never been done, there's no reason for an ego. The numbers show if it's working technically, the numbers show if the customer's buying it, if the regulator is going to adopt it. And if not, once you have the data, the faster you can make a pivot to just the right course correction, the better.
So when you're trying to get to product market fit, the reason that you have to move so fast is because you're constantly iterating. So you have to give yourself, you have to move fast enough where it gives you enough time, or because you've kind of, shortened that window, I guess, that you can iterate multiple times around what's working and what the customer needs.
Yeah, precisely.
How do you move, how do you make sure outside of data, how do you push the team? Because I know, when you come from a big company, you're right. You can debate these ideas and what works, and you never, ever feel like you know for sure you have the right answer. And unfortunately, you've debated now for 2 months. How did you create this muscle almost where you're like, we're just making the decision? Where it's, even though you're facing this, like, I don't know if this is right? And you're this unknown. How'd you create that muscle?
Yeah. So frameworks is the short answer, and then people who know how to use the frameworks. And so when we start to look at a difficult decision, you look at, well, what are all the things that affect the decision? And then what are the potential outcomes? And then what are my choices? And then I just love math, where you start to look at and say, well, if we now do sensitivity in any one of these outcomes or any one of these scenarios, what just puts us in the best position? And usually as you do that framework analysis and look at it that way, it becomes very clear of, no matter what scenario, this is the right next step forward. this puts us in the best position. I still don't know about this, but I know that's the right move. And it's really exciting to have a team that knows how to do this. Like our CTO, our CFO, Mike Armstrong, Dustin Turley, program managers, these men and women are just incredible at identifying opportunities, at analyzing, getting the data, and then discussing it. That they're eloquent people. They'll challenge me. Sometimes I don't love it all that much because they challenge me really hard, but it's proven to have really good decisions where you can say, that's the right step forward. We're taking that step. And now that you've built the framework, you can say, well, if I don't know this, as more information becomes prevalent, I can either pivot or, okay, that's the next right step to take based off of now what we've learned.
Well, you mentioned something that's, probably so key. I mean, it's key for all the way in your journey, but especially early on is the right people. How did you, a big part of your role as the CEO and founder is getting the right people on the ship. How did you get the right people? What was it, that allowed you to do so?
Well, relationships matter, and you spend so much time building those relationships. And one of the best ways is to build trust and to be candid. Hope Mike won't get mad at me, but Mike had a lot of choices to be our CTO or not the CTO. And there was a moment where we recruited him. He was out here, and he had an interesting choice he had to make of does he go to an aircraft company or does he come to a propulsion company? He was, prior to this, he was the head of hybrid propulsion at Rolls-Royce. And the one thing that we were very transparent about is like, well, here you're going to do a lot. You're going to do a lot of architectures. You're going to do a lot of propulsion systems. And if you pick an aircraft company, it's going to be one. Now, I'm not going to put a value judgment on either one, but clearly outlining like, this is what you'll get here, and this is what you'll be giving up if you come here. But let me tell you why I love it. And that seems to have done really well in recruiting. And then just really building the relationship of an atmosphere of, you just want to work with smart people. You just want to work with hard problems. It's amazing. We relocated to Logan, Utah from Los Angeles. We were concerned that it was going to take so long to build up a knowledge base in Los Angeles that's such a dynamic entrepreneurial community that we would lose a lot of that. And so we took a big bet coming to Utah and saying, will talent relocate here? And almost everyone, in fact, 95% of my leadership team is not a Utah native. You look at our next tier down, it's very mixed and very diverse. So people are coming here because they just want to work with smart people. They want to work on hard problems. And very similar story as me and Mike, is just want to do something that matters, do something that really moves the industry forward.
So the problems with staying maybe in LA is that people rotate pretty often. And so you couldn't keep kind of the knowledge that maybe you've gotten over a year within the company. It would just keep leaving. Was that kind of part of the problem?
That was part of the challenge. It's very hard to protect the intellectual property when it's in somebody's head. And when you come to a place like this, there's not 4 other startups that are trying to look and act just like you.
Yeah. Well, I want to do, as we kind of get close to the end, maybe a little bit of a quick fire, but you make quick answers on a few things. Biggest mistake that you've made throwing EPS?
It's a great question. Biggest mistake that I've made is expecting that people can do what I can do and being over optimistic about that. So if you look at my background, Matt, like, hey, I went to a state college. I got a great master's degree from Arizona State, but I've never saw myself as like, I see myself as pretty average. And so I've always made this bad assumption. It's like, well, if I can figure this out, I'm sure
anybody can
figure this out.
Right.
And so a lot of times what's happened is I've assigned people tasks where it was beyond them. And there's pros and cons to doing that. If you've done it in the right way, it stretches the person, it helps them grow. Where I've got it wrong is it's really detrimental. to the individual and to the business. And that's been really painful when that doesn't work out, or because of my optimism and because, hey, I know I can do it, and have that expectation. When somebody fails here, it's very been devastating to that individual. And that can become a real challenge within the culture, is when someone's put their whole self into something and believe that they could hit it, and they just didn't do that. As I've aged, I've gotten much more intelligent of, what do we assign people? We still want to stretch, we still want to grow, but let's not overwhelm people.
Yeah.
Sure,
Don't set them up for failure. What's surprised you the most?
what surprised me the most of founding this is how challenging and personal it would be. Aerospace seems like it's a very number driven academic type industry, and it is. It absolutely is that. But the people side of things, how personal it can be, what's going on in somebody's life can determine how productive they're going to be. Their attitude can determine how fast they're going to grow. Their attitude can determine if they're going to solve a problem like that. That it shouldn't be a surprise. I know that sounds obvious, but as I reflect on it, it's the soft people skills has been all the difference of whether we thrived and succeeded or whether we've struggled.
Interesting. Yeah, company's still made up of just people, right? Just building something, no matter how technical. You got a million things on your plate. As a CEO, so does everyone else on the team. What has been the most impactful system, habit that you've implemented that has really helped you tackle the work?
Impactful habit. It's a great question. Well, I'm a big fan of operating systems. So I have something I call a management operating system that I will write down every meeting, every purpose for that meeting, every person I will talk to, and every metric. And that's really helpful because that's the only way I've found to be proactive in a role like this, where the nature of startups is there's more work than you can accomplish, and it's all good. There's no bad things that you do. It's all good, but you only have time for the essential. And if you don't set up the meetings, the discussions, to be able to force that the essential is moving forward, that has been a big part of it. And then things like how we set goals. We use objectives and key results. Been very, very helpful to get everybody on the same page of like, this is aspirational, guys. This is a moonshot. Don't know if it's going to work, but we're all going to throw ourselves into this, whether it's a buzzsaw or not. And everybody's on board with the way that we've done that. Or, hey, this is committed, this objective. Like we absolutely have to do this. We absolutely have to do this within this time frame. So having the goal setting and then have the structure to manage it, that's been the most useful tool to be able to stay on top of things.
I love that. Yeah, it's amazing how much just even writing it down really takes it out of your head, right? And takes the ambiguousness of it all just out, right? And a little less stress. All right, as we wrap up here, what would be, well, two questions actually. One, because the company that you're building is so fascinating and how it's going to be so integral in aerospace, what does 10 years look like for the company, in your opinion? You can be optimistic. You're the CEO and the co-founder.
All right.
And then the last question after that is just your parting advice for other founders.
So the vision is in 10 years from now, you don't think GE Aviation for power and propulsion, you think EP. And you've got a company that's completely shifted how we travel, how we move. And the ultimate 10-year vision is much, much more of the human population has had the experience to be on an airplane, to travel, to connect, to do work. Most people don't know that only 20% of the population has ever been on an airplane. And that's astounding when you think of, we use it every day, and we just think it's a normal tool, but compared to the rest of the world, we are pretty fortunate. We're really, really fortunate to do that. Now, as far as advice to other founders go, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Where else would I want to be right now. I think a lot of founders talk about the struggles, the challenges, and certainly I've highlighted some of those, but I could be bored sitting in an office in a big company. Yeah, maybe making more money or maybe having more free time, but I tell you what, being able to do something that matters, doing it with the people that I've got to build it with, getting to face the challenges we do, whether we succeed long term or we fail, it's worth it. It's worth it again. And if you ask me, knowing what I know now, would I do this again? Oh yeah, sign me up. I'll do it.
That's awesome. You just hit the nail on the head of the best part of startups, doing the things you love, doing the things that matter, and doing it with the people that are the best at it that you love or you learn to love. That's the beauty of startups. Nate, thanks so much for taking the time to, talk about the industry, everything that EPS is doing. So excited to follow you guys for the next 10 years and how pivotal you are going to be in the electronification of aviation, of submarines, of, going to outer space. There's probably things that I can't even imagine that you guys are working on or on the applications that would be really cool to see. So, Nate, thanks for taking the time and really excited to follow along.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for letting me come on, share our story. It's been a lot of fun.
It's a cool story. So definitely worth the time. Thanks, Nate.
I tell you what, being able to do something that matters, doing it with the people that I've got to build it with, getting to face the challenges we do, whether we succeed long term or we fail, it's worth it. It's worth it again. And if you ask me, knowing what I know now, would I do this again? Hell yeah, sign me up. I'll do it.